Hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining online as well. I'm Nicola, and we are going back into encounters with Jesus. But before we get into the encounter with Jesus, I want to throw out a question to you, and I want answers. So shout out your answers. If you're watching online, put them in the chat. It'll be great. It'll be interesting to know. But the question is, if you could be any Bible character, who would you be? Thomas, straight out there. Thomas, is that because you're called Thomas? Why would you be Thomas?
He's the apostle that I closely relate to the most out of all believers.
Nice, that's good. Anyone else? Peter. Why Peter?
Because he took risks, he stepped out in faith, and he learned by that to get close to God.
Yeah, that's really good. He took risks. He stepped out in faith. Nicely linked to the preach. Well done. Anyone else? So I heard something. David. Why David? He was the king. Do you know what? In the first service, someone said Jesus, and then it was beaten, and someone said God, and I was like, do you know what? That's a good person to be. My answer, I was asked this quite a while ago now. My answer, without hesitation, I said, the woman who was bleeding for 12 years. And that's the woman, one of the people that we're going to look at in the encounter today. But the person who had asked me this question just kind of looked at me slightly confused and said, are you sure you want to be the woman that bled for 12 years? And I said, yes, because of her faith. And faith is so important. It's our belief in God. It's that faith that we are saved, our trust of who God is, what he's like, faith that he is good, that he's powerful, that he's close, that he reigns over everything, that he's King of Kings, that he's our Savior, that he's our healer. Faith that he is kind, faith that he loves you, faith that he delights over you, that he's working all things for your good. And faith, as Paul puts it in Ephesians 2, is a gift from God. We're saved by grace through faith, faith given to us from God. We can't manufacture faith. We can't will it into being. It is a gift from God. And we're given this gift, and we are responsible for it. We have to nurture it and shape it and let it affect how we live our daily lives. And we need to be doing this. We need to be nurturing and shaping our faith, because our faith can change. How our daily living faith can be affected by circumstances. It can be built up by situations, and it can also be knocked by situations. Faith can be nuanced. It can be complex. Sometimes we're full of faith, we are strong, we're ready, and we are saying, yes, God, come and do anything. Other times, it can feel quite weak, and actually we're just about holding on. Maybe for you, actually coming to church or watching online, that's a huge step of faith for you today, to just cling on to Jesus. And sometimes we're just in the middle of those two extremes. We're somewhere in there. So my question is, how is your faith today? Are you feeling strong, full of faith? Or is it feeling a little bit weak? Or are you somewhere in between? Maybe you give some parts of your life to God and you're like, yes, God, got faith there. But actually there are other areas which are harder to believe. And the beauty of this passage that we look at is that we see these two people full of faith, but there's also the complexities of faith in the passage. We're looking at Luke 8, verses 40 to 56. The passage will come up on the screen behind me, but if you have a Bible or you have a Bible app on your phone, do get it up, because we'll be looking at the passage throughout the preach. And in this passage, we see people who are full of faith. We have these two storylines. One of a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years, and one of Jairus, who is a synagogue leader and his daughter. And we see these two storylines beautifully meet and intertwine with Jesus at the center. And in it, we see Jesus' response to the weakest, most desperate steps of faith. And so we're going to read this passage, and I really want to encourage you to kind of try and step into the passage. Sometimes we can read a passage from the Bible and kind of just like read it and skim over it. It might be a really well-known passage to you, but we miss kind of being in the situation, in the scenario, seeing what is going on. So let's read the passage. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, and a synagogue leader, came and fell at his feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl about 12, was dying. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. Just pause for a moment there. The crowds almost crushed him. Let's just say, like, this is not a small crowd. Say it's everyone in this room, just kind of in these two center sections with Jesus right in the middle. Like, this is a big crowd. And Jairus has just come up to Jesus in the middle of this crowd, in the center of this crowd, and asked him to come. That's not a small feat from Jairus. And in this crowd steps the woman. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. There would have been noise in this crowd. We read, the next line says that they all denied it when Jesus asked this question. But I wonder what it was like for this woman. I kind of feel like probably noise kind of drained out of her, and she was just felt so called out in that moment. Just Jesus knew. She's been found out. And so it continues. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." This woman who had been bleeding for 12 years and so had been an outcast for 12 years, here's the word daughter. She's identified as part of the family. How must that have felt for her? How must that have been to hear that word? And while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. And the thing is, while this whole interaction with the woman is happening, Jairus is still there in the crowd. He's still waiting for Jesus to move, to continue on his way to his house. And then he gets the worst news. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her hand by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. This is such a beautiful and incredible story of God's power. And it's this beautiful narrative of these two stories of faith. It's bold, audacious faith, but it's also raw and it's messy faith. These aren't faiths without their struggles. In fact, these faiths are risky, but both Jairus and the woman move towards Jesus. And we get to see what happens. We get to see what happens when risk-taking faith meets Jesus. Jesus, the one who sees and draws close to the one who moves towards him. Both these people, Jairus and the woman, are complete opposites. And they take different risks in it. Jairus is a synagogue leader. He's going to be highly respected in the community. He's going to be known. He's going to have a high social standing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have this woman. She would have been an outcast. She might have been known in the community, but she would not have been known for good things. Under Jewish law, because of the bleeding, she would have been classed as unclean. People wouldn't touch her, they wouldn't go around her, they wouldn't even sit in a chair that she had sat in, because they would be made unclean. She would have been shunned, rejected. But both Jairus and the woman are desperate, and they come to Jesus. Jairus has 12 years full of life that are about to come to an end as his 12-year-old daughter is ill, while the woman has 12 years of suffering that she has given absolutely everything to end, but is still enduring. And these desperate people come to Jesus, taking risks in different ways. Jairus is bold. He's up front. He goes to the front of the crowd and says, Jesus, you need to come to my house. There's risk in this. What would Jesus have done? What if he was rejected? Well, everyone was going to see this. What was his job? Was his job going to be on the line? He's a synagogue leader. He works with Pharisees who hate Jesus. This was risky. This was bold. And while Jairus takes a big public risk, the woman takes risks, but tries and desperately to stay hidden. She doesn't ask Jesus for healing. She might not even have thought about it because of her situation. But she shouldn't be in the town. She shouldn't be in that crowd. But still she goes. She goes, she breaks the Jewish law, and she goes into that crowd to touch Jesus, to take that step of faith. Both Jairus and the woman have big and bold faith. And within it, they take risks to go to Jesus. Jairus does it publicly, the woman does it privately. But the beautiful thing is that Jesus responds the same way. Jesus sees them and full of love moves towards them. He draws close to them because he moves towards the one who moves in faith towards him. He isn't worried about how they did it. He isn't worried whether it's public or hidden. Actually, Jesus commends the woman for her faith, although she does it privately. He says, your faith has healed you. Jesus, in the middle of a crowd clamoring around him for his attention, sees the one. Jesus goes with Jairus despite the crowd. He stops for the woman even though there's something urgent to go to. Jesus sees them both and he draws close. He draws close to them. And he does it with us. Jesus sees and draws close to the one who moves in faith towards him. If we move towards Jesus, if we step towards him, however good our faith is, however public or hidden it is, he moves towards us. He'll see us and he'll draw close. And he always does this full of love. Stepping towards Jesus, making steps of faith can be risky. It can feel really risky. And sometimes there are very big risks involved. And that's okay. It's okay for it to feel risky. It's not a bad reflection of your faith. But it is what we need to do. We need to always be moving towards Jesus, however our faith is. Confident of his response. Confident that just as Jairus and the woman were met with love and seen and drawn close to, he does the same with us. Are you moving towards Jesus today? Does it feel risky? Jesus is saying, come. And faith can be risky. And there also can be barriers to faith. Things that might stop us from taking that step of faith. And we see two big ones in this story, shame and loss of hope. Because shame could have so easily stopped this woman from going to Jesus. It could have so easily stopped her from entering into that town and entering into that crowd. But as we see in the story, when faith of the ashamed meets Jesus, actually deeper healing is found in that moment. Shame can come in all different shapes and sizes. It can come because of what we've done or what's been done to us or what has been said to us, what's been said over us, what we've said to ourselves, what we believe about ourselves. This woman would have been told for 12 years over and over again that she was unclean, that she was to be avoided. She would have believed that she was dirty, unloved, unworthy of being with others. And this is how she comes to Jesus. This is actually, she doesn't speak to Jesus. She comes with that shame. She doesn't even think she's probably worthy of speaking to Jesus. She comes hidden. She just wants to get in, touch his robe, and get out. I wonder if she thought, what would Jesus think if he knew that she touched his robe? What would the crowd do if they knew that she was in that crowd? But despite the shame she would have felt, she still goes. She still moves towards Jesus. And you know what? She nearly does it. She nearly doesn't get caught. She nearly gets in, gets her healing, and gets out. And then Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, because he is fully wise, stops and asks, "Who touched me?" And I paused on this moment in the story because I'd just love to know what went through her brain at that point. What panic went through her when she thought, I have to confess. And it's kind of like, Jesus, what are you doing? This poor woman. Don't call her out like that. She got the healing. Can't she just keep going? But Jesus had more in mind for her. He doesn't just bring physical healing, but he brings deeper healing. He brings emotional healing. He brings mental healing. He brings spiritual healing. What Jesus wanted to do was deal with the very shame that could have stopped her from being there in the first place. And as she comes forward, this is what happens. Rather than being met with anger, she was met with love. Rather than being cast out, she was accepted. Jesus does deep healing as he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." One writer put it like this: instead of telling her off for touching him, he affirms her. Instead of treating her as a nuisance, he acknowledges her place in the family. He says, "Daughter." Instead of rebuking her, he commends her faith and the confidence she places in him. He says, "Your faith has healed you." What must it have been like for that woman to hear those words? To be looked at with love rather than disgust. To have been seen and accepted rather than rejected. Jesus didn't just heal the 12 years of the sickness, but he healed the 12 years of the shame and the hurt. She was brought into the light so she didn't have to continue living in that shame. And this is the same for us. When we come to Jesus full of shame, we're not met with anger or rejection. We're met with love by the one who sees and draws close to those who move towards him. I have had a repeating picture from God about the picture in Revelation about the robes of Jesus filling the temple. And a few years ago, I had that picture, and it was of me playing as a small child in these robes, and Jesus saying, "You can come in, you're welcome, and you can play, it's okay." And then one time I was full of shame, and I was really struggling, and I took that to Jesus. And it was hard, I didn't really want to, but I took it to Jesus, and Jesus gave me this picture again of his robes filling the temple. But rather than me being a little girl playing in his robes, I was just lying in his robes. And as I saw this picture and as I gave my shame to Jesus, he just filled me with his peace and I was filled with his love. And I just got to lie there in peace, knowing that he's dealt with it all. And that's the same for each of us. That's the same for you. Do you know that you can come to him with everything, with all the shame? And he doesn't look at you and reject you. He doesn't look at you with disgust, but he looks at you as love. And he draws close to you. Come to Jesus, draw close to him, because I know that he will always draw close to you. He wants to do deeper healing in you today. He is the one who sees and draws close, full of love to the one who moves in faith to him. But shame isn't the only barrier to faith. Here we also see in this story there is a loss of hope. And this can be a huge barrier to faith and stepping out. Because while all this deeper healing is happening for the woman, we have Jairus waiting for Jesus. Jairus probably is not feeling patient at this point. I've seen parents with their children when their child is in trouble. Mama bears do come out, very real. Like, he can't be fine with this interruption. And then he gets the news of the very thing that he went to Jesus to not happen. He hears his worst nightmare has happened, that his daughter has died. And here we see what happens when faith of the hopeless meets Jesus, and he calls us into deeper faith. For Jairus, it feels like all hope is lost. Jesus didn't come through. He got caught up with the crowd. He was interrupted by this woman. Didn't he realize the urgency of Jairus' situation? Didn't he care? Did he care more about this woman than his daughter? Jairus' faith can't have been strong at this point. People are even telling him, stop bothering Jesus. Give up. There's no point. But just as Jesus didn't leave Jairus just as Jesus didn't leave the woman in her shame, Jesus didn't leave Jairus in the hopelessness. You see, Jesus draws close and sees Jairus again. And he says, don't be afraid, just believe and she will be healed. You see, Jesus hasn't given up. He hasn't lost hope. He knows who he is and the power that he has. The circumstances haven't fazed Jesus. And he calls Jairus into deeper faith when all hope seems lost. It's like he's saying, you trusted me when it was urgent. Now trust me when it feels hopeless. You trusted me when it was alarming. Now trust me when it feels and seems irreversible. Jesus is still working, he's still moving, and he invites Jairus to come with him, to go with him, to continue walking. He invites Jairus to continue to have faith, to continue to move towards and see what Jesus will do. And we don't know how hard that walk must have been for Jairus. We don't know what was going through his mind. We don't know what he was feeling at that point. All we do know is that he kept following Jesus. He kept going. And the thing is, faith in Jesus means that we put our trust in someone who we may know to be good, powerful, and loving, but also someone who doesn't always do things as we want them to, and doesn't always do things in our timing. At times, it can feel like the miracle isn't coming, that Jesus has got distracted with someone else's situation, that all hope is lost. But in those moments, Jesus still sees you, and he draws close, full of love to you. He's still there, he's still at work, and he's asking us not to be afraid and to believe. He's asking us to continue trusting him and to continue walking with him. He doesn't leave us in the darkest valleys when all hope seems lost. He continues to be with us. He tells us to cling to the truth. He tells us to trust. And we can cling to that truth knowing that he sees us and he draws close to us, and we can cling to the truth that he has the victory, that he is the one who has defeated death, He is the one who is the last word and the last laugh. Everyone laughs at Jesus when he says to stop wailing, the little girl isn't dead. And Jesus says, look, she's risen. Whether our walk is short like Jairus's or far longer, whether we see healing and restoration now or we have to wait until we see Jesus face to face, we can hold on to Jesus, come into him, and knowing that we will find love and compassion, knowing that he sees us, that he draws close to us, knowing that he does deep healing that we aren't even aware of, and knowing that he holds the victory in his hands. And so we can take that step of faith, however small that faith is. We can be sure that when we step towards him, where we reach out to Jesus, he sees you and he draws close to you, full of love. And the thing I love about the faith in this story, and as we've seen, is that faith doesn't come neatly packaged. Faith doesn't come without its struggles. Faith can be messy and it can be complex. But when messy, raw faith meets Jesus, he takes it and he makes us whole. Throughout this story, there is mess. There's people everywhere. There's a crowd. It will have been loud and noisy and messy. There are interruptions all over the place throughout this story. There's ideas of how to be healed that aren't exactly biblical. We don't know why this woman thought that she would be healed if she touched the edge of Jesus' robe. And at the center of it, there are these two situations that under Jewish law are some of the most polluting situations. A woman with menstrual bleeding and a dead body. But what we see is not that Jesus runs from these people or runs from the situations. He doesn't deal with them from a distance. He doesn't decide that they're not worthy. No, what he does is he moves towards them. We see him drawn with love towards these people. Jesus is drawn into the mess. He continues to see and draw close to the one who moves in faith towards him, however messy the situation is. Because the mess doesn't faze him. He isn't worried about becoming unclean. He moves towards them, he touches them, he speaks to them, and he does the same with us. Jesus doesn't need neat, perfect faith. All he wants us is to move in faith towards him. And he does the rest. He isn't worried about our mess or our shame or our lack of hope, because Jesus is in the business of restoration. He loves to take broken people and make them whole. It's the very reason that he was on earth, that he walked on earth, and it's the very reason he went to the cross for us. The woman and the little girl didn't make Jesus unclean. Instead, he made them clean. He restored them. Jesus wasn't repulsed by the woman. He takes her shame and he calls her daughter. Jesus isn't worried about Jairus' lack of faith. He gives him fresh hope and calls him into deeper faith. See, Jesus sees it all. He sees all of our mess. He sees all of our shame. He sees all of our hurt. He sees all of our brokenness. He sees all of our doubts, but it doesn't stop him from moving towards us. Jesus is always seeing and drawing close to us, full of love. We just need to step towards him. He's dealt with everything on the cross. In Isaiah, it talks about how Jesus gives us a crown of beauty for ashes, joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise for despair. He sets the captives free, binds up the brokenhearted, and comforts those who mourn. However we are feeling, however you describe what is going on in your life, however you feel your faith is today, we can come to the one who has defeated death, the one who has won the battle, the one who holds everything in his hands, the one who has the last word, the one who reigns over it all, the one who has taken our sin away and who makes us whole, the one who brings healing, who restores us, the one who sees and draws close to the ones who draw close to him. We can approach God's throne of grace with confidence. We can be We can rest in the assurance of his mercy and his grace. We can lie in the folds of his robe in the temple, knowing that we are safe, knowing that he's making us whole, knowing that he has deeper healing that he wants to do, knowing that he's bringing deeper faith and loving us through absolutely everything. So I ask that question again. How is your faith today? Is it messy? Is it bold? Is it risky? Is it full of shame? Whatever your faith is like today, you can step towards Jesus with it. Take that step of faith towards Jesus and know that Jesus sees you and he draws close to you in love as you do.